Good morning. Hello.
Good morning,
Good
Professor.
morning.
Good morning.
Oh, good. We did it. Oh, how nice.
It's
All right.
it's great to see you.
Okay,
And
you can see me. I can't see you, but that's all right.
yeah, yes, we can actually see you.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
it's good evening in India.
Yeah, it's good evening here.
All right. Very good. Very good. It's nice to be back in Kerala again. Glad to see you. You know,
Thank
I
you.
was here, what was it, 20 years ago?
Oh,
Yeah,
I think yes, 20 years back. Yes.
yeah, it was a long time ago. And I still remember the wonderful tea factory close by.
Muna.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just get my notes and I'm ready to start in about a few minutes. You know, my friend, the Ullman family lived very close by, and my friend's family lives close by. Her name was Prema Thomas. She taught at your university. So
Yes.
good to be back.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Now we've exchanged pleasant greetings. Good.
our
Coffee.
college is probably nearby as well, the same district.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We had such a wonderful time there. That was our only trip to India. And we went only to be with our friends for a while. And we spent the entire time in Kerala. It was wonderful. Okay, I'm ready to go. Tell me when I should start saying clever things.
Definitely, sir. I think I will hand it over to the MC of the day, Vishnu Priya.
Okay. I will sit and behave myself until you tell me to start. And drink magic liquid. Liquid
Hello?
made
Yes,
from
Vishnu.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
Morning.
you are. Yes, Vishnu Priya. And can I ask Aparna to stop the
Sharing the-
presentation? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, I'll start. When in the wild, a newborn animal is busy learning to move around on its feet like its mother, a human baby is busy using its brain to absorb sounds and the circumstances around it. It's during this time that we acquire language, which would remain with ease in us and be called our mother tongue. Noam Chomsky once said, "A language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of a community, a whole history that creates what a community is. It's all embodied in a language." Good evening and welcome to each and every one of you who are here to attend the international webinar on language acquisition and learning organized by the Department of English of Marian College, Kuttikkanam Autonomous. Today we have with us Professor Stephen Krashen, the expert linguist who is Professor Emeritus at the University of California, whom we all have been waiting eagerly for. Let me invite our department head, Dr. Shinto Dennis, to welcome Professor Krashen and the audience of the event.
Thank you, Vishnu Priya, for that wonderful beginning. Dear Professor Krashen,
Morning or good evening.
good evening. Dear scholars, dignitaries, and all those who have joined us virtually, good evening, good morning, and whatever applies to your country. A great greetings from Marian College, Kuttikkanam. It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you to the international webinar, a session by Professor Stephen Krashen on language acquisition and learning, organized by the Department of Communicative English, Marian College, Kuttikkanam, located in Kerala. Accredited with NAC A grade and securing the UGC status of college with potential for excellence, Marian College has a unique and enviable history of gaining autonomy in a span of 20 years. This is a proud moment for the Department of Communicative English to have with us the renowned linguist, Professor Stephen Krashen. Professor Stephen Krashen, thank you for accepting our invitation, first of all. And on behalf of Marian College, Kuttikkanam, I extend a hearty welcome to you, Professor.
Good morning or good evening. Thank you very, very much. Am I ready to begin and say wise things?
Oh, can I welcome the others as well? Maybe
Okay,
for a
please
few
do.
minutes?
Okay, good.
Yeah,
That's
thank
fine.
you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Reverend Father James Korumala, our manager, is a man of spirituality and willpower. Hearty welcome, Father. Reverend Dr. Roy Abraham, Principal, is a great support in all our endeavors. A warm welcome, Father. I also welcome the whole faculty team who stay united and strong in the Department of English. There are a few people who deserve special welcome. We have with us Professor Thomas Umman, Director, Masscom, Kottayam, and Mrs. Sandra Umman, who hold a warm relation with Professor Krashen. Hearty welcome to both of you. The first time I heard of this name, Stephen Krashen, is from NIT Trichy, where I did my PhD. I welcome my professor, Professor Vinod Balakrishnan, and all the professors from NIT Trichy. I welcome all the professors, scholars, and students who joined us today. I also welcome Father Sobi Kanalil, the team leading the YouTube live, student coordinators Atul, Aparna, and Vishnupriya, and all my dear students. Let me also take the privilege to introduce the speaker of the day for you. I think most of us, he needs no introduction. However, this is a part of the welcome and the introduction. So, Professor Stephen Krashen, Professor Emeritus, University of Southern California, is an expert in the field of linguistics, specializing in theories of language acquisition and development. Much of his recent research has involved the study of non-English and bilingual language acquisition. Since 1980, he has published over 100 books and articles and has been invited to deliver over 300 lectures at universities throughout the United States and Canada. Krashen's widely known and well-accepted theory of second language acquisition has had a large impact in all areas of second language research and training. Krashen's theory of second language acquisition consists of 5 main hypotheses. The first, the acquisition learning hypothesis. Second, the monitor hypothesis, the input hypothesis, the effective filter hypothesis, and the natural order hypothesis. And we are privileged to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Once again, let me take the privilege to welcome all of you. And now it's over to you, Professor Krashen. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction. But I have a couple of corrections. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. It's not since 1980. It's since really 1970. I've been doing this for 50 years. Can you imagine? And gone a long way, and there's a lot more to do. This is the most exciting time in research for language acquisition ever. This is so much fun and so interesting. Also, it's not just 100 publications. I haven't been just sitting around doing nothing, okay? It's like, last time I looked, would you believe, I'm more surprised than anyone, 540, and maybe by the time the lecture is over, it'll be 541, because there'll be more. And I'll tell you the secret of it in a few minutes, how all this happens. I have 3 goals today. Number 1 is to make language teaching and language acquisition much more pleasant for students, more pleasant for teachers. Number two, I'm going to try to make it more effective. I think we're doing well, but I think we can do even better. Number 3, I want to save you some money. Nobody has any money now. Nobody, except for 2 or 3 guys that I know of in the United States. They've got most of it. And I've got some ideas. Let me do that first. Let me get to the money part first. I no longer publish in regular journals. I don't buy books anymore. I can't afford them. And I mean, we're okay. Thanks to my very generous parents. The secret of financial success is of only one way, it's inheritance. That's the only way anybody has any money. I figured that out. And my parents were very, very generous. If Thomas and Sandra Uman knew them very, very well. Anyway, I don't do this anymore because they're too expensive. I can't afford the journals. I can't afford the books. Nobody can. Unless you are associated with a class 1 university and it has a library and you have full library privileges, you cannot keep up with the research. Journals are so expensive, you can't afford them. And if you see a copy of one of my articles in a journal and you want to buy it, it cost $40 US. Wow, that's just for one article. Nobody can do it. Here's the new look. I started this about 6 years ago, and I was inspired by a professor of mathematics, very famous algebraic geometrist. We are now doing what is called open access. Everything is open access. My articles are all available for free. They cost you nothing. I'm no longer writing books because nobody can afford them. I'm writing short papers, publishing them in open access journals, and so are my colleagues. This is changing and it's to the good. If you want to see my papers, my website, sdkrashen.com, D is for my middle name, David. And I'm also on something I really like. It's called ResearchGate, researchgate.net. I'm putting my articles on it, and so are my colleagues. There are about 10 of us putting everything on ResearchGate, free download, share with your friends. My articles make wonderful birthday presents. You can give them all to your friends and your students. So this is how we're doing it. I think this is very serious. Otherwise, our scholarship will not survive. There's two other things I want to say about publication. I can't keep up with the journals and articles, not only because they're too expensive, but because the articles are too long and too boring. My papers are now short. This is not yet caught on. Okay, they're 2 pages, 3 pages. I was inspired by an article that appeared in Nature, considered the #1 journal in science. It was about the double helix, Crick and Watson. Remember the diagram that talked about DNA and all this stuff? It was published in the top journal, 2 pages. No long introduction, just state the point and more radical in clear, easy to understand language. You don't need to make it difficult for people. So this is changing. So please take a look at my website, sdkrashen.com. It costs you nothing. Take a look at ResearchGate, and you can download the articles, use them in classes for students, and most important, colleagues, I hope you will join me and start writing them. The only, because I need your information, I need your knowledge. You have insights I don't have, so we must share knowledge more freely and easily. Every few days, probably, I get an invitation to review a paper for a journal. And I like doing it. I think it's a responsibility. Other people have reviewed my papers. Generally, colleagues make excellent comments. I started a new policy 5 years ago. I said, I will not review papers that are longer than 5 pages. Since then, I have reviewed 0 papers. They're all much too long. I have more time than anybody here today because I'm retired. I'm retired living at home in quarantine. It's a terrible time right now because of the virus, but I must confess I'm having a good time. I kind of like it. I'm at home. I'm here with my girlfriend. We've only been married for 55 years. Okay, so it's still fresh and exciting. Okay, best friends with Mrs. Uman for many, many years. And I'm working. I'm doing a lot of work, and it's so I have more time than you do. But still, I don't have enough time to read the journals. They're too long and they waste too much of my time, and they're too complicated to read. It doesn't have to be that way. So this is my sermon. Let me now get into the research. I'm going to begin with the hypotheses, not all of them. We've modified them a little bit, of course. The first one, big one, wow. When the acquisition learning hypothesis, I didn't realize that I had invented it. I thought other people had been using these terms in a similar way. There are two ways you can get better in another language, acquisition and learning. Acquisition, the synonym is picking up a language. I was in France for a few weeks and I picked up some French. That means you acquired it. I was in Kerala for 10 days and I picked up a little bit of Malayalam, not very much, but okay, this is how it happens. You don't know that it's happening. After it's happened, you're not even aware the knowledge is there. You cannot stop it. My feeling now, hypothesis, is that the acquisition device, the language acquisition device, never shuts off. It always works, and I'll tell you how it works in a few minutes. Language acquisition, we are very good at acquiring languages. When people say, I'm not good at languages, no, and they're the right conditions, we are all very good at it. The other process we call language learning. Language learning is knowing about language. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. In phonics, when two vowels go walking, the first does the talking. All these rules. These are knowing the rules consciously. We are not very good at language learning. We do it very awkwardly and it's difficult. It's difficult for me too. More on that in a moment. Next hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, and this kept me and my colleagues very busy in the 1970s and 1980s. It was wonderful work. We discovered for first language and second language, for children and adults, we acquire language in a predictable order. Some things come early, some things come in the middle, some things come late. For example, in English, the progressive tense, John is playing the violin, is early, okay? It comes early in children and adults, first and second. The third person singular, which many of you have spent hours and hours trying to teach, comes late. For children in first language, there could be 6 months to a year between those two. For adults, the third person singular may never come. We all know people who speak English extremely well, and they still make mistakes on the third person singular. I have to gossip now and tell you about my friend, Matt Shibatani, who was my colleague at USC many years ago, a good man, good friend. His office was across the hall from mine. He got his PhD with Noam Chomsky, the true living master. Noam Chomsky is still doing very well, by the way. He's in his 90s and he's still doing beautiful, exciting work. He is still my hero, okay? Anyway, Dr. Shibatani was an expert, having studied with Chomsky, on English grammar and on Japanese grammar. And I always he spoke English as a second language beautifully. And I always went to him for my information on grammar when there was some fact I didn't know that I needed. Dr. Shibatani, his written English was perfect. His spoken English was very good, but guess what? He occasionally made mistakes on the third person singular in casual conversation. He knew the rule since he was 10 years old. And I'm sure he knew more about grammar than anyone in Southern California, okay? But that's not enough to acquire it. They're very different processes. Well, the natural order, some amazing facts about it. Number one, you can't change it. You can drill the third person singular all day long, but just like good wine, it will not be acquired till its time has come. It's not from simple to complicated. The third person singular seems so easy, but it's late acquired. A lot of complicated things come very, very early. 3, I was wrong about this one. I was wrong about a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. This is how we progress. I freely admit it. The natural order is not the syllabus. I thought that was it. 1982, I gave this speech at the TESOL meeting. I'm sure you were there in Los Angeles. My speech was very popular. Standing room only. There were only 10 chairs in the room. That's why I had this tiny little session. And I said, we have the answer. It's the natural order. Just tell teachers what the order is. Teach along the order. No, I was wrong. If you give people the right input, the result is the natural order. We shouldn't have any teaching order. I'll come back to that. The next one is an interesting one, the monitor hypothesis. And this tells us about grammar. What's the role of conscious learning? I have been misquoted on this. Of course, we've all been misquoted in our lives. People say, well, Krashen says, don't ever teach grammar. Grammar is evil. Teach grammar, go to jail. No, I'm not opposed to teaching grammar. Here is my official Steve Krashen position on grammar. It's hard. It's limited. It's hard to learn grammar. It's hard to apply grammar. The rules are complicated. I'll restate that in terms of 3 conditions. If you want to use grammar we use it as a monitor to correct ourselves, correct our writing. If you want to use it to correct yourself while you're speaking, you want to apply a rule. Several conditions have to be met, and this is hard. Number 1, you've got to know the rule. This already eliminates most use of grammar. Language is very complicated. The world's greatest syntacticians don't know all the rules. And that, of course, is still our hero, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky knows more about English than anyone alive, knows more about English than anyone who has ever lived. He doesn't know all the rules. If you ask him, he says, well, we have discovered only fragments of the grammar. The best grammarians, people who write grammar books, don't know all the rules. We don't teach all the rules. Even our best students don't understand all the rules we try to teach them. They forget them. I don't know all the rules, etc. So this makes it pretty hopeless. Number 2, if you want to apply grammar rules, you've got to be thinking about correctness while you're speaking. That's very hard to do. 2 things at once. It's kind of like rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time. It's quite unnatural. So can't be done easily. Number 3, if you want to do it, you got to have time. In the speech stream, when we're talking, it's very hard to get enough time to think about grammar and apply the rule while you're speaking. Very difficult to do this in such a time constraint. Now, when are these conditions fully met? When are these conditions met where you know the rule, you're thinking about correctness, and you have time? When you take a grammar test. That's the only time when this even has a chance of happening. And our studies back in the 80s, even then, we found that given grammar tests and people who study hard, they still don't get everything right, as you all know. They still can't apply the rules. So the monitor, we call it the application of rules, is not useless. It's not bad. It's just very, very limited. It's hard to do. Okay, how do we acquire language? Now, let's finally get to the important thing. Let me begin this discussion by giving you some quick lessons. I'm going to teach you a language that I'm sure you've heard before, and maybe a couple of you speak. And I'm going to give you 2 very fast lessons, and you tell me which of the 2 lessons you like better. Here's lesson number 1. I'm going to let you guess the language. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte Ihnen voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson? Do you think if I kept talking to you like that, you'd acquire German? No, not a chance. How about if I said it more slowly? Would that help? Not really. How about if I said it and then you repeated it back? No. How about if I had a board here, I wrote it on the board, and you read the word and wrote it down, read the sentence, would that help? No, none of those things mean anything. That's not the way we teach language. Here's lesson number 2. Das ist mein Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf, ja? Gut. Hier sind meine Hände. Ich habe 2 Hände. 1, 2 Hände. Hier sind meine Augen. Ich habe 2 Augen. 1, 2. Hier sind meine Brillen. Ja, gut, Glasses. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Ja, meine Zigaretten. Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. And now the big secret. This was not my discovery, but I think it is the most important insight in the field. We acquire language in one way, and only one way, when we understand it. If you understood even some of what I said in German, you acquired a little German, and you can't stop it. That's how it's done. Let me restate what I just did by stating, I think, some remarkable facts, some amazing facts about language acquisition. Language acquisition is effortless. It takes no work. All you had to do was listen to me make a few silly jokes in German, and you acquired a little bit of German. Wow. No pain, no heavy effort. Number two, I think this is amazing, involuntary. As I mentioned before, you all just acquired it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's too late. You just acquired some German. That's how language acquisition works. Let me tell you how language acquisition doesn't work. Big surprise. Output is not the way we acquire language. We don't acquire language by talking. We don't acquire language by writing. Talking is the result, the ability to speak is the result of language acquisition, not the cause. And the research is quite strong on this. Having students talk more does not increase their speed of language acquisition or the quality, okay? Writing more will not make you a better writer. Writing has other benefits. Writing makes you smarter, as you know, scholars. You write something down, revise it, you get a better idea, and that is the core of what we call the composing process. But it will not help your writing style. It will not make you a more accurate speaker or writer. Now, the status of the affective filter hypothesis. This was mentioned to me by a colleague, Leonard Newmark. Let me tell you the gossip about Leonard first. It's always interesting. I went to my aunt and uncle's 50th wedding anniversary party about 30 years ago. They live close to us in the Los Angeles area, and they had a big party at the local synagogue. And I walked in the door, my wife and I, and there was Leonard Newmark, an accomplished scholar from San Diego. And I said, Leonard, what are you doing here? He said, Steve, what are you doing here? I said, it's my aunt and uncle's 50th anniversary. He says, no, it's my aunt and uncle's 50th anniversary. My aunt Anne married Boris Newmark, and Leonard is their son. And we have similar ideas. This is also mystical and interesting. Leonard said, yeah, he agrees that it's comprehension. I've quoted his work a lot. And he says, if you want to do it by input, you've got to say things that are interesting, so people will pay attention to them. That's a radical idea for a lot of language classes. Not only should it be interesting, it should be very interesting. The word I like is compelling. We want input to be so interesting, you forget that it's in another language. That's what we're looking for. We don't want conscious awareness and all that. We want the focus to be completely on the message, which is why having interesting conversations, we'll talk later, reading good books, hearing good stories in class is extremely effective in language acquisition. Very important. Language acquisition is gradual. It's a little bit at a time. It doesn't happen all at once. We think in our classes, and I've made these mistakes too, we present a rule on Monday, they practice it, they'll do fine on the test on Friday. No, it doesn't work that way. The research I'm dependent on comes from research from the University of Illinois in first language. There's a research team headed up by Richard Anderson at Illinois, who their conclusion was, working with first language, each time you hear a new word in a comprehensible context, or you see it written and you understand the text, you get a little piece of it. You don't get it all at once. You get maybe 5, 10% of the meaning of the word. And gradually over time, you build up the full meaning. We have confirmed this in second language acquisition. It works for second language acquisition as well. Most of our acquisition, in fact, nearly all of it comes from context. Well, people in our field, we've been very hesitant to believe this. We think that context is not very reliable. Maybe you'll get the wrong meaning, etc. The favorite example is if you see a picture of somebody pointing, you don't know if that means finger, pointing, hand, etc. But most contexts are helpful. A beautiful study done 1963 in text, they found about 60% of the meaning of unfamiliar words is made clearer through context. Very rare are you headed off, are you pushed in the wrong direction. This has to be. It's the only way we can account for the huge number of words that we all know. The average fluent, proficient native speaker of English, which includes everybody here, the minimum absolute minimum, about 100,000 words in English, not to mention words you might know in Malayalam, Hindi, other languages. The number of words we know is too many. We can't do it one at a time. 50,000, 100,000 words, it's not 100,000 trips to the dictionary. It's not 100,000 flashcards. It can't be done. It must come through input, through context, gradually over time. So this is the theory. I've given you the whole theory. We're going to talk about application now. In application, I've made up a new technical term. By the way, those of you who are young scholars who are interested in establishing a reputation for yourself, I know the secret and I'll share it with you. Here's what to do. Invent new terminology. If you do that, people think you invented the idea and you'll get all the credit. This worked for me. I have all this new terminology. I didn't invent the concepts, but a lot of people think it's my idea. And the trick to impressing people and making them think you're smarter than they are is to make the terminology not very clear. Make it a little bit opaque. When you do that, people aren't quite clear and then they really think you're smarter. I did that with just about everything. People still don't understand what I+1 means, and it's all my fault. But I get credit for being very, very smart. Okay, and undeserved in that case. Today's new vocabulary word, the conduit hypothesis. Now, if my scheme is working, you should have no idea what I'm talking about. I have to explain it. That's a perfect new term. People kind of have an idea, but they need explanation. So you get more credit this way. Conduit means we acquire language in stages, and each stage is a conduit to the next one. It helps you acquire the next stage. Conduit, of course, means passageway. The first universal stage hypothesis in first and second, stories. In fact, I think stories are the foundation of nearly all language acquisition. This is how it's done. We know, being parents, that children love to hear stories. In studies, they found about 95% of children like to hear stories. They like to be read to. They like it when mommy and daddy tell them stories. Only about 5% of children interviewed said they weren't interested in stories. Turns out these were the same children whose parents didn't like to tell stories, okay? Most of us love to tell stories to kids, okay? This is the beginning of language acquisition. This is the comprehensible input that starts them on the path. The first stage in practice is based on stories. Nearly all the popular methods now, the new ones, are based on stories of some kind. I'll mention one to you. This is developed by my colleague, Beniko Mason, who works in Japan. And she works with, at her university, she just retired, she works with college students who are doing English as a foreign language. And her method, which I think is very applicable, is based on what she calls story listening, pretty much common sense. She's done a very good job with it. She decides in advance what story she's going to tell in class. So it's for intermediate students. Usually she takes things from Grimm's fairy tales, stories that have, as she says, have stood the test of time. She reviews the story first, picks out the words and phrases that she knows are going to be a little bit difficult. In advance, she prepares explanations. She likes to draw pictures. So there's a story about a man and woman. Here's a picture of a woman drawing it, and drawing it gives them a little more time to process. This is basically it, and the story is then told using drawings, occasionally a translation here and there. She speaks Japanese, so that helps. Not necessary, but helpful. And of course, gestures, we are all familiar with this. Here's the major point that makes this so exciting. She does not tell the students to remember the new words. She does not tell them, write them down, and here's a list, review them later. The focus is on the story. She will draw a picture or give a quick translation to make the story more interesting. Major result coming up. When you do that, vocabulary development is better. Her typical experiment, she will do one story with story listening, where she'll, give draw a picture, etc. And then that will be compared to telling a story and then giving extra activities, vocabulary building activities. Draw a line from the word to the definition, write 3 sentences with every word. Doesn't work as well. In terms of words acquired per minute, it's more efficient to tell another story. The direct vocabulary activities will give you a little bit of vocabulary gains, but not as efficient and certainly not as pleasant. I get a lot of books of stories. I love them. I read stories in all the languages I'm interested in. And usually the books have activities at the end of the chapter where you can review the new words. No, read another story. That's the way of doing it. Well, this is the beginning method, the story, we should call story listening. This can go on for quite a while, folks. This can go on for hundreds of stories, a full semester, 2 semesters, etc. The next stage is reading. I want to give you first the research on reading, why I think it is so wonderful, and then I'll give you the application, how Dr. Mason does it, okay? The research, I'm going to give you just a few examples of the research. In my opinion, the most powerful tool we have in language education is what I call free, voluntary pleasure reading, not assigned reading. Free, voluntary pleasure reading, reading you want to do it. Assigned reading, folks, doesn't work. When I was in high school, I did a lot of reading, as you did, on my own. I was a dedicated reader. My favorite was science fiction. I read the complete works of Arthur C. Clarke, who lived not far from you, the complete works of all the greats, Robert Heinlein, etc. I remember those books today. I read sports stories too. I read baseball stories, John Ortunis, and I still think they're wonderful. They were really about life. They were wonderful. The first John Ortunis book, The Kid from Tompkinsville, one reviewer said, this is the young people's book of Job. This is a book of suffering and recovery, etc. So the popular books for children are so many of them are wonderful. And of course, Harry Potter made a huge difference for everybody, including me. I thought it was wonderful. Anyway, I still remember these books today. In school, I did a lot of assigned reading. I did the classics that we read in English class. I remember none of them. It's all gone. The books I decided to read myself, I remember everything. I've reread several of them, and I'm betting the same thing has happened to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of research on this, and then the application, how we do it these days. The best study, of course, is ours, the one I did with Dr. Mason. She has a program in which students read on their own after they've done lots of hearing stories. The teacher helps them find books, and some of them do it for many, many years. And we've collected data on them. We gave the students, this was voluntary on their part, what is called the TOEIC test. a very popular, widely used test of English and listening comprehension and reading. Pretty good test, actually. And here's what we found. The more you read, the better you did on TOEIC. We had students who read for a couple of months. We had several students who read for a couple of years, and we saw their TOEIC scores increase. The amount of reading you did, and we had records of what they read, how many pages, was by far the best predictor of the TOEIC score. In fact, those of you who remember your statistics, it was the only significant predictor. We did multiple regression, all that. The amount of self-selected pleasure reading without question was the most powerful predictor. It didn't matter if you studied, it didn't matter if you did grammar lessons, if you took classes, it was the amount of pleasure reading you did. This was the best predictor, and there was no room for any other predictor in our analysis. Here's something else. The TOEIC test ranges from 0 to 1,000. If you reach 250, you know enough English to start doing a little bit of easy reading. When you get to 600, 700, 800, you have arrived. You've gotten what we call academic English, no question. For every hour these people read, they gained more than a half a point on the TOEIC. Wow, and it was quite consistent and remarkably little individual variation, which is why I think we're all gifted for language. We get the right input, we'll all make pretty much, a little variation, but pretty much the same improvement. This means you read for 1 hour a day, you'll gain 50, 60 points in a year. If you read more than that, you can go all the way. If you read, say, 2-3 hours a day, you'll make enormous progress. That's pleasure reading, books that you like. Now, let me talk a little bit about self-selection and why it is so important. And my final message, I'll say it again, is going to be the importance of libraries, no question. Access to books. All the way from 0 to 60, in 0 to the highest levels, in terms of academic language as well. We'll come back to that. Other studies say the same thing. Study done in the UK, in London, University of London. This was with native speakers of English. There's this group of researchers who've been studying the same people since they were babies. And they're now in their 40s. And every few months, they give them a little test, a little task to do. They compare the results over time. They gave them a test of English vocabulary, their own language. The best predictor, fiction. No question. Fiction readers did slightly better, in fact, than nonfiction readers. Still, the amount of reading was the factor, but fiction was the most important. Reading for pleasure is also the source, believe it or not, of academic vocabulary, the vocabulary you need to do well in school and have a career. All this money we're spending on academic literacy, the textbooks, books of drills and exercises on academic language. There are these lists of academic words you should master, etc. Let me give you the good news. Rolls and Rogers. I'm dependent on my colleague, Jeffrey McQuillan, for the research on this. He has cited it and done a lot of it. One study, Rolls and Rogers, if you read 1 year of science fiction, about 1 million words, you will gain nearly half of the scientific words you need to understand all the scientific areas. You'll be much better prepared to study any kind of science. Dr. McQuillan himself has done this. He's compared the efficiency of doing words through direct instruction and reading what he decided was interesting fiction for young people, Harry Potter, etc. You get most of the vocabulary you need. In fact, his more recent study, he looked at the 7 popular Harry Potter volumes. The Harry Potter volumes contain about half of the academic vocabulary you need for academic success. So this is going to be a lot easier than we thought. Lots of self-selected reading. I'm very much in favor of self-selected, and a lot of this comes from the research, but also People have said this. Garrison Keillor is a well-known humorist on the radio, great deal, very clever. And he talks about this. He says, when I was in college, I was an English literature major, and my friends know this. So when it's time for, gifts, birthday, etc., I always get some classic literature book from my friends, the Bronte sisters, an early play by Shakespeare that nobody knows anymore. And I have them on a shelf in the room. And every time I pass by that shelf, I feel the books staring down at me, making me feel guilty because I haven't read any of them. When someone gives you a gift book, it is a signed reading. You dread the day when they ask you, "Oh, did you read that book? How did you like it?" And you have to well, gee, I haven't gotten around. It's a signed reading, and you're tested on it. They want to know if you've read it. I never give books as gifts, and I don't like getting books as gifts. Well, this really applies to fiction and storybooks. I'd rather get them myself. I don't listen to other people's recommendations even. With fiction, though, there's one exception. There's one person, when he recommends a book, I immediately go out and get it and make sure I read it because he's always right. He knows me better than I know myself, and that's my son, okay? So you always have someone in your life where you take their word for it. I take his word for it, no question. And in terms of nonfiction and academic work, oh yes, someone recommends a book, I immediately take that recommendation very, very seriously because it's usually quite right on the spot, quite interesting. But in general, for storybooks, fiction, I like to get it myself or listen to what my son tells me. We get our vocabulary from reading. People who read more have far larger vocabularies. This is the main source of our vocabulary. Well, there's more. This is a gift that keeps giving. Reading not only gives you vocabulary, grammar, etc., consistently in the research, but it gives you more. People who read more know more. They know more about science. They know more about history. They know more about geography. They know more about nearly everything. And this is from reading fiction. Isn't this remarkable? I have to take a moment away from this intense focus and tell you about my cousin, Evelyn. She's part of this. Evelyn is now 93 years old. We all have an older relative or two like this. And I love Evelyn. We talk on the phone all the time. She lives in the Chicago area. I'm in Los Angeles, but we still make sure. Evelyn was always wonderful to me. She was the older cousin in my life, and she and her husband, Marty, were always just great. I used to go to their house all the time. I would play the piano. Evelyn would play the violin. She and my mother were absolute best friends, a beautiful aunt-niece relationship. I'm still very close to Evelyn. And the other day I was talking to Evelyn, and she said, Stephen, I've been very interested in finding out more about the law. My late husband, Marty, had a law degree, and it really helped in every aspect of life. I think I'm going to take a class on how to be a paralegal, how to know about law. And I had a suggestion. I said, Evelyn, I got a suggestion. Read novels by John Grisham. You'll get all the legal information you'll ever want. I told her, read 10 novels by John Grisham, and it's like a year of law school. I have read books by John Grisham, basically listening to them in the car. She's right. The stories are so good. We've been talking on the phone. She said that was the best possible advice. She reads John Grisham novels. I, in fact, get them for her, okay, because she loves that. I order them, I send them to her. And since I'm telling you about it, it is now tax deductible. So it doesn't cost me that much. It's a professional investment because we can see how Evelyn is doing. This is where we get it. There's more about reading. This keeps going. And I got some good gossip coming up. The research, I got interested in this when I read an article in Scientific American a couple of years ago. And I've read all the research. I started following the citations, and it turned out to be really interesting. Reading, and especially fiction, gives you superior, what they call habits of mind. People who've read lots of fiction grow cognitively. First thing you get from fiction, this is what the research says, you learn to avoid simple solutions. You understand the world is complicated. Simple solutions don't work. Also, you get to understand people. You grow in empathy. This is because when you read fiction, you take the role of the author, the narrator, the first person who gives the first person role in the novel. You live the same life that that person does. You also meet a lot of people in fiction. If I finally got around to reading Murder on the Orient Express a couple of years ago, wow, do you learn a lot about people and what their thought processes are. So you get all these things. I'm coming up to a grand conclusion. You get grammar, vocabulary, spelling, all these things come from reading, come basically from reading lots of fiction. You get these wonderful habits of mind. You learn and you get a knowledge of the world, how it works. Well, let me tell you about something I'm very proud of. I got a letter to the editor published, I'm bragging now, published in the Washington Post. I was so happy. There was an article, and this is very timely. There was a lot of discussion in the Washington Post about Donald Trump, who is very much in the news, as he always is. Donald Trump, as we know, had a lot of activity on Twitter all the time. He would stay up late at night and he'd put up about 50 tweets. As you know, he's been banished from Twitter. They won't let him do that anymore because it causes problems, causes violence, and we're all somewhat relieved. But in the Washington Post about 4 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about Trump because he made lots of spelling mistakes in his tweets. And people were complaining. They wrote and said, he's a terrible speller, shouldn't be. And other people defended him. We want him to be the commander-in-chief, not the proofreader-in-chief, et cetera. So I wrote a letter which they published. Amazing. I said, spelling, this is a serious problem because spelling indicates a deeper pathology. Our own research has connected spelling and reading. People who read more do better on spelling, and we know Donald Trump doesn't read. He brags about it, in fact. It also is important for grammar. It's important for writing style. All these aspects of literacy come from pleasure reading, which he doesn't do. We also know that Donald Trump doesn't know very much. He knows practically nothing about science. And quite seriously, thousands of people died because of Donald Trump's ignorance about the COVID virus. He makes silly comments about nearly everything in science. He doesn't know anything about history, geography. He was in Israel a few years ago, and his host took him to the airport. I'm sorry, he was in Egypt, and he was about to take a plane to Israel. And he said, well, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. It's still too early in the morning for me. He was in Israel, and he was about to go to Egypt. And he said, well, I'm off to the Middle East. And the question you have to ask is, where do you think you are now? You're in Israel. That is the Middle East. He makes these mistakes all the time. So I wrote this letter. They actually published it. Can you imagine that? It is fiction that does it, that gives you literacy, these wonderful habits of mind, and factual information. I'm going to talk now about another application, what you do after stories. And this is again from Dr. Mason, and I'm going to tell you my experience with it first. I have tried it myself. I am home. I am home during quarantine, as I mentioned to you, and quite busy all day doing work, etc. I'm exercising like I should. I'm doing research like I should, all this stuff. And I'm working on my languages. I think for people like me, it's extremely important to be involved in languages all the time. There's some languages I'm pretty good in, some I'm kind of in the middle, some I'm terrible. And that is very helpful for understanding the process. So I decided to read in Spanish. What Dr. Mason suggests is you do lots and lots of easy reading. She calls this guided self-selected reading. In pedagogy today, what we do, we teach the grammar rule of the day, and then we give them a reading passage, and the passage has all the new grammar and vocabulary. It's always very hard. I've been doing real easy reading. I've gotten what we call graded readers in Spanish. I've been reading them. I've been reading some graded readers are getting better, folks. They become real literature, and I really enjoy reading them. And once, I'm doing it every day, about a half an hour, easy stuff, pretty good. And once a week, Friday mornings at 6:30 in the morning, I've been going to the supermarket, because a special time you can go there where it's for old people only, and that's me, because we're the most susceptible to the coronavirus, as you know. Anyway, the first time I went there, I got, there was a guy who was checking me out and charging me for the food that I bought. And I noticed on his name tag that he was Hispanic. And I spoke to him in Spanish. My Spanish is kind of in the middle. And he answered me in English, polite thing to do. And I then said to him in Spanish, I said, my goal is to speak Spanish as well as you do. And I would like you to help me. Please speak Spanish to me, which he loved. You know, is my respect for his group, which is genuine. And since then, I've seen him once a week for the last several months, and we've talked for about 2 minutes, and he speaks Spanish to me all the time. When he sees me in the store, he'll come up and say something in Spanish, etc. What a nice guy. Now, it's only like 2 minutes every week. That's not a lot of speaking. I've been improving, and I know, my suspicion is I've been improving, and I can tell from him, he now talks more quickly to me. He uses more complicated language. He uses more sophisticated vocabulary. He can tell that I'm getting better, and I am. I spoke Spanish yesterday and did one of these webinars with friends in Texas. And the host there, we speak Spanish occasionally, he says, you know, you're getting a lot better. This is very interesting. So I think this works, not from the speaking, but from reading lots and lots and lots of very easy books. This is called guided self-selected reading, where in classes we give students access to lots of graded reading. In Dr. Mason's university where she taught, the library had 5,000 graded readers in English, so students could self-select. This is what we need to do. We need to supply an enormous number of very, very easy books and let them select in terms of topics. And the teacher's job is to help them select books that are right for them, that are consistent with their interest and consistent with their level. This is the new look. It's through reading. This will only happen if we have fabulous libraries. The research from my colleagues, Andrew Pucci's research years ago, children get their books from libraries. And when, especially now, when the economics is worse than it's ever been, libraries are our friends. I am encouraging people to copy my books. If you have any of the books that I wrote, feel free to copy them, make a PDF, and share them, okay? I've been on Twitter a lot. If you want to know where my books are, etc., don't just check my website, but follow me on Twitter. It's good for my reputation. I'll have more followers. And I announce where the new books are. When I loan someone a book or I give someone a book, I'll give people books. I say the price is, please make a PDF, keep the book, but give me a copy and let me post it. So we're managing to do that. I am hoping other authors are going to do this because we can't afford to buy their books. Let me complain for a few minutes. The books that are out now about second language acquisition and books that students have to read in class are so unbelievably expensive. That is a shame. It's a tragedy. This happened to me. I got wind of this in 2007 when I accepted an invitation to write an article in an edited collection. It was called Input Matters, a little play on words. Okay. And I wrote a long paper. I had such a good time. I thought it was one of the best papers I've ever done, but it was too long. I talked about first language, second language, literacy. I talked about, believe it or not, I had a whole section on comics. I had a whole section on What will happen when the aliens come from other planets? How will we talk to them? How are we going to learn their languages? I had a really, really good time. The book finally was published. It looked absolutely beautiful, hardcover, price, new price, 160 American dollars. They gave me 2 free copies, big deal. I could order copies at author's discount. I can't afford it. Even at author's discount, it's too expensive. My paper from that book is on my website. You can see it, okay? So I look at what people are ordering for classes. 2, 3 textbooks are going to cost $500. I don't know anyone who can afford this. We are strangling knowledge of our field. We're making it impossible. So I freely give people access to copy my articles, to share them, and I'm trying to make this happen with my books. I think this is the future, and it is the only way our profession will survive. Now, there's a problem with this. People are thinking, well, I'm a junior professor. My university will not accept things in open access journals or something I get for free. We've got to have prestigious journals where they get some respect, where they're expensive, et cetera. Things are starting to change. The big revolution against the journals was begun, as I told you, by a mathematician, and his major enemy was Elsevier, the academic publisher. Yesterday, Elsevier has just decided they're starting to move toward more open access. And if people like me, old people, do more open access, it will become more accessible. So I'm appealing to the senior scholars in this group to take this seriously and at least publish some of your papers open access so people can read them, so I can read your papers. If you're not open access, like most scholars, I can't afford them. Nobody can these days, okay? So that is my message today. Let me open the floor for discussion. Oh, there are some questions here. Oh my, alternate orders of acquisition. Actually, not really. There is a little bit of individual variation in acquisition, but not very much. What about listening? Yes, listening's fine. One of the great breakthroughs is audiobooks, books on tape. I discovered this myself a few years ago. I live about 40 kilometers from the city, from Los Angeles. And if I want to go into the city, I got to drive. It's the only way in because buses are like twice a day. That's about it. So I started driving in. It's on what's called Pacific Coast Highway, if you know California. And there's nothing more boring than driving on Pacific Coast Highway. And I have to go into the city because there are a couple of things there that draw me to the city. When COVID is over, I'll be going back. First of all, my grandchildren live in Santa Monica, so I've got to go see them. It's, impossible not to. And I go to Gold's Gym, pumping iron, where occasionally I see Arnold Schwarzenegger. Anyway, what do you do in the car? Well, I do have some music, but okay, after a while. And I listen to the news and oh my God, it's awful. And the AM news is all pro-Trump, politically conservative, and there isn't that much any other way. So I've stopped that. I discovered audiobooks. I first got them in CDs. My daughter was working in the Santa Monica Library, and I kept going to their collections, saying hi to her. And I got these. What you have in CDs in the library and books, audiobooks, you have popular everyday literature. It's not the classics. And I found out this was the beginning of my love affair with popular literature. So many of these are good. I listened to the John Grisham novels. My first adventure in popular listening, of course, Harry Potter. Wonderful. Harry Potter is all about education. J.K. Rowling really understands teaching and how a school should be done, put together, etc. I did all of those. And these books are so good, the popular novels, that on the way home, you stop at the supermarket, you sit in the car and listen to the end of the chapter. That's happened to you. It's happened to me. So I do recommend this stuff. I think the authors I'm so surprised at how good they were, how good they are. And that's how I discovered John Grisham and made the recommendation. Question, what about verbal communication? Verbal output, it's a lot of fun and you'll invite some more input, but more talking does not mean more language acquisition. I'm not against it. I'm not forcing people to shut up. No question. Speaking is one of the great pleasures of conversation, but you're not going to get a lot of input from conversation. It's not bad, but it's not the best source of input. I also think the same thing is true of music and songs. Okay. What about English medium schools? What about exposure? Yeah, but I think fiction's better. I think if you become a dedicated fiction reader, you're going to get, and it's self-selected. You're going to be attracted by the books. You'll become a totally hypnotic reader. You'll become a dedicated reader. Yes, teaching other subjects in English is certainly it's going to help. I'm a great fan of teaching in the mother tongue. When we teach in the mother tongue, I know there's a big controversy on this. It's in the newspapers what is going on in India, providing more text for engineering students in the native language, which I think is a very good idea. When you do that, the subject matter is more comprehensible. If you do, say, an algebra class in the mother tongue, and then they do another class in math later on, they're going to understand more. So first language is a huge help. I'm glad people are doing it. I didn't have time to write a letter to the newspaper that had the article in it, but I would recommend reading fiction. And I'd recommend reading lots of fiction to build up academic vocabulary. So the combination, do it in the primary language and also do lots of fiction in English. Okay, I'm looking at the other questions. What if it has a different alphabet? So glad you brought that up because I wrote a short note on this and sent it to a colleague last night. I've been dealing with other alphabets. You got to do this yourself. The researchers who don't are missing the point on this. I've been working on a couple of languages with different alphabets. Mostly it's been Chinese. There are two writing systems in Chinese. One is Hanzi, which is the characters. The other is called Pinyin, which is the romanization. And people want you to do the Hanzi, want you to get it in the script, in the original. If you want to do Farsi, you've got to do it in the Arabic script, etc. This is Arabic, etc. Hebrew, I know Hebrew. In Hebrew, I got the script because that's all we did for 2 years of my life, wasted doing the alphabet one at a time. It's so much easier. Here's what I recommend. I like romanization. I think romanization is terrific. I know you'll be shocked and horrified, but hear me out. Most of my Chinese comes from reading Romanized texts in Chinese. Because of that, I can speak a little Chinese. I don't know people who speak Chinese. I don't have a Chinese class nearby. I can't get comprehensible input from natural Chinese classes. These books are my only source, and they have been wonderful. They've been absolutely fantastic. There aren't enough of them. That's the problem. The only books I know that I find real, there's one author, Terry Waltz, who writes them in Pinyin, in the simplified, and I've read whole novels by her, and that's been a big help. I've tried to co-author some with my colleague, Linda Lee, and my colleague, Hyun Lu, who lives in Milwaukee, has done a really nice set of books about kittens, where they have real personalities and characters and interactions. That's it. That's all there is. That's why my Chinese is so limited. Eventually, when you get the language, when you understand the language, it's a lot easier to get the complex alphabet. Here's how we read. And this is the philosophy of Kenneth Goodman and Frank Smith, two giants in the field that I have learned an enormous amount from. Unfortunately, they both passed away this year and quite recently, a real loss. The theories are this: we learn to read by understanding what we read. And the way we understand everything is by making predictions. Frank Smith says we're predicting all the time. And our predictions are usually correct, which is why we're so able to get through the day. In the sentence I am now speaking, you know exactly what the last word is going to, I could say, and you will think you heard B. When we make correct predictions, we acquire language. That is the process. It's a serious scientific hypothesis called analysis by synthesis. The more you know of the language, The more background knowledge you have and the more you understand the language, the easier it is to learn to read. So I maintain that the first step, not only step, is reading Romanized texts. And again, I'm experimenting on myself, okay? Then gradually introducing the characters in comprehensible context. I think that's the way that at least deserves a trial to see if it works. So yes, this is the way to do it. The next
Yeah,
one, what about Greek? Yeah.
Yep, Stephen, just one second. I have recently come across something called language attrition. Because since we are from Kerala and we have a lot of people who travel abroad and migrate to different parts of the
Thank you.
world, and the thing is that many of our next generation have almost forgotten their language, their mother tongue, and
That's
is
right.
it possible to get it back?
Yes, it is. And we have just finished giving papers on this, et cetera. My colleague, Nushan Ashtari, and I have been working on it. She is working with Farsi, what is happening to Farsi children. We know that shift happens, if you pardon the expression. It definitely happens. The typical instance which you're aware of, when someone, let's say someone from Kerala, is comfortable in Malayalam when they're young, they speak Malayalam to their parents, the parents answer, but then they go to school. By the time they're in 5th grade, they can hardly talk to their grandparents. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. This is it. And the language is lost along with a great deal of cultural knowledge, wisdom of the elders, and they get a lot of blame for it. The children are blamed. They say, "Oh, you don't speak very well. What's wrong with you? You're not a true Kerala citizen. We're ashamed," etc.
Yeah.
And it's not the child's fault. They're not getting the input. When they make mistakes, they are sometimes teased, scolded, especially if they're the younger child in a family. And people feel that speaking is the essence of language. They don't give a lot of respect. In the family, I know the Uman family, in fact, who are here at the Talk Out, when they live close to us, their children, whom I'm still close to, dad, we call him Acha, of course,
Okay.
spoke Malayalam to the kids. And they would eventually, over time, they would be answering in English. They weren't answering in Malayalam. And when someone else from India would come over, they would speak English to the kids. And I would say, you might try speaking Malayalam to them. They understand it. Yeah, but they don't speak.
Yeah.
When they don't speak, people think they don't know the language. Also, we have this standard. Sandy, if you're listening, I'm going to talk about your cousin Philip now. Philip is from the Kerala area, and his English is absolutely wonderful. I met him when he was visiting California. And he said he's hesitant to speak Malayalam in public. We talked about it, word finding.
Yep.
There'd be a gap where he wouldn't get the right word. That's it. He spoke the language perfectly well. The problem is we blame the children. The cure is exactly what we're recommending, stories and a reading habit. We have a couple of cases like this. Lucy Say has a wonderful book, TSC, on bilingualism. And my former student, Grace Cho, has looked at this as well. We have a couple of cases where young people have come to the United States speaking Korean, Japanese, Chinese, languages that are quite different, without any education in the home country. They came when they were very young, and they developed a reading habit in Chinese, Japanese, etc. And in every case, it has been light reading, comic books, magazines that they pick up from family, etc. Eventually, one of them got into heavy novels, etc., and absolutely loved it. They all speak their heritage language beautifully.
Yeah.
From the reading habit.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you get it, other people talk to you in the language, and you have a real life. My colleague, James Crawford, who wrote the textbook on bilingual education, great work. He says there are no disadvantages to developing the home language, only advantages. People who know the home language have a better sense of their own culture. They don't have this damaging syndrome of rejection of one culture, adopting the other, etc. They are open to the wisdom of the elders. This is wonderful. And you'll like this. If you take two groups, and they have the same background, same academic accomplishments in the beginning. One keeps the home language, one doesn't. The one that keeps the home language does better in school. Not only that, there are more job opportunities. Famous expression from Joshua Fishman: if you go to another country and you want to buy, you can do it in English. But if you want to sell, it's good to know your customer's language. Okay.
That's good.
So I'm greatly in favor. I expect to start hearing good news about Malayalam programs in Kerala. I hope you take them seriously and begin with stories, good books, etc. I think this is the path. It is win-win.
Exactly.
I don't have a heritage language. I got my heritage language late in life. Typical story. My parents, my grandparents.
Hebrew, right? That's Hebrew, right?
No, Yiddish.
Yiddish,
I'll tell you
yeah.
about both
Yiddish,
of them.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about both of them. My grandparents spoke Yiddish to my parents. My parents answered in English. Then when I had a year off, my parents were so nice to me. I had a year off in college where I went to Vienna and studied piano. I wanted to be a musician. I still practice all the time. It's wonderful. Still play the piano. I don't take it. I play in synagogue too. That's a lot of fun during the services. Anyway, I noticed when I came back from Vienna, my mother and my grandfather picked me up at the airport. And Grandpa was talking Yiddish to Mom. Mom answered in English. I suddenly understood nearly every word because German and Yiddish are very, very close. I asked my mother to speak Yiddish to me for the whole summer, which she did. And I listened to Yiddish folk songs. Every year on the holidays, I talk to my 90-year-old cousin in Israel, and we speak Yiddish. It is so wonderful.
That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
I'll give you another heartwarming story. At the synagogue, my closest friend there is the cantor who does the singing, and he's from Argentina, and he's highly multilingual. He's amazing. And, we do the music together. We write a play for the synagogue together every year. It's great fun. His mother comes to visit from Argentina. She speaks Argentinian Spanish. My Spanish isn't bad, but I can't understand a word she says because the dialect is so different. So we speak Yiddish. Isn't that nice? We speak the language of the grandparents, and we have a pretty good relationship when she comes. We sit around and gossip. Hebrew came later. Hebrew came when after living in Ethiopia in the Peace Corps, which is where I met my wife, who's Sandy Uman's close friend. We went to Israel and we spent 6 months, and I began to acquire Hebrew from the classes, which is very well taught. And I got to be reasonably competent in Hebrew. I'd say low intermediate, where I could do the daily stuff, etc. Had lots of friends and did okay. The problem with Hebrew is this, and you'll know exactly why I'm bringing this up. I haven't had a real Hebrew conversation in 50 years. Israelis, the ones I know, all speak Hebrew, all speak English as well as I do, okay, as well as you do.
Yeah.
Our cousin, Shira, who's now a famous actress in Israel, it's great, wonderful person, stayed at our house for the first week when she went to acting school here. We got to be very friendly. Her friends came from Israeli, always English, always English, always English. Their English is so good, it's ridiculous. When I was in Israel 2 years ago at a conference on reading, I would speak Hebrew in the stores, and they heard my accent, immediately English. English has so much power in Israel. It's basically their language, okay? And they do Hebrew on the side. So my Hebrew has gone nowhere. And that's been a lesson in sociolinguistics and the power of languages. Yiddish, I'm fine, but nobody speaks Yiddish anymore. I'm probably the only Yiddish speaker left in Southern California.
Oh, that's great.
Except when my cantor's mother comes, who's my age.
in this part of the world, in Kerala, we have Syriac. We are actually trying to get it back, especially the priests of Syro Malabar Church and the other churches, like Syrian churches. They're trying to get it back, the old Aramaic
Look,
thing. Yeah.
you're working on this. I want to know about it. Please, let's get together. Write short, comprehensible, open access papers. Read our papers. Go to, the problem is there's no access to reading material. Go to researchgate.net, download, take a look at the papers of Nushan Ashkari, Ashtari,
Yeah.
who's my colleague originally from Persia, of course, from Tehran. And she has written articles about the difficulty of maintaining Farsi among the kids. So let's get together on this. Let's compare notes. See what
Exactly, yes.
on this and save these languages and help families connect with each other. So great question. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, we have with us Professor Vinod Balakrishnan from NIT Trichy. I would love to hear from you as well. Professor Vinod?
Oh, yeah. Hello, Professor Krashen. It is wonderful to listen to you. We've been reading you for about 30 years now. I teach creative writing, and there is one piece of advice I give the class, which is I tell them you need to build your own library. Each one builds his library or her library according to their choice. And one person's library is very different from the other person's library. Now, that probably ties in with the idea of a self-selected guided reading. I just want to know, listening to your presentation, is there a closeness in the brain, in the spots from where stories come from, and the language that comes? Do they happen together, or are they in two different spots that when one happens, it triggers the other? Is there any research in neuroscience which is interested in where the stories come from and where the language comes from? Because we are tying them together as a possible way to acquire language.
Well, of course, you've asked the right person because I'm a famous expert and I know everything, right? And because of my expertise, I can give you a very sophisticated answer. I have no idea. I have no idea. It's a wonderful question, but I have not kept up. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at it in neuroscience. My dissertation was on the brain, left, right, hemisphere, all that. So I try to keep up. Great, wonderful question. But when you brought this up about libraries, I realized there's something I should mention. A very good suggestion. Santa Monica High School. There's a teacher there, Carol Jago, who's also former president of Teachers Union, teacher organizations, literacy. She does good work. Here's her idea. Every English teacher in the school has their own classroom library that reflect their interests. I can't tell you where the different stories are in the brain, but I can tell you where they are in Santa Monica High School, okay? Carol's great idea. Like, there's one teacher who likes historical fiction. In her classroom are novels, historical fiction. Another teacher likes my favorite science fiction. So that teacher has hundreds of science fiction novels. The teachers make no attempt to have a well-rounded library, but the students are allowed to visit libraries of different teachers. Isn't that fantastic? So they get to know all the teachers, even the ones that they don't study with,
right?
And they get to see that grown-ups are narrow readers and narrow reading is okay. So my suggestion is we give in to our temptation into
Yes.
our infatuations with different styles of writing and different authors.
Yeah.
And we open it up to our students as
Okay.
well. And we do that anyway with our friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I try different tack in the creative writing classroom, but I tell them that I would not interfere with their choices, their thinking process, or their preferences. Maybe I would make suggestions as wide as I can make. I will try very hard, exhaust myself giving them suggestions, but not at any point try to intrude or push myself into their choices and consciousness.
that I think you're doing it. You have my blessing, young man. You're doing that.
Thank you.
That's great.
No, I think that's exactly right. What we want is guidance.
Thank you.
We want help in finding things, not dictating, must be this, but help. That's exactly right. Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, with that note, let me ask Dr. Raju Sebastian from say SB College Changanasheri for his question, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Krashen, for that insightful lecture. I am teaching English language teaching and linguistics at the postgraduate level. And actually, I did this experiment of making children or making undergraduate students read very light storybooks to acquire language. But then I have encountered a practical difficulty. Children were very enthusiastic in picking up the books that I have provided them. I have asked the librarian to provide the books, and he has actually provided it. And it went on for 3 months. And after that, I had no clue how to assess whether they have acquired something, because I am speaking about language teaching in a formal setup. And what I have done, my role was encouraging them, giving them or leading them to the books, and they have selected the books and they have read. I think within 3 months, I think each student read about 40 books, but of varying standards, as you have suggested. But ultimately, there was no assessment. Do you think that an assessment is necessary in a formal setting like ours? Because we're speaking in a formal setting.
No, you're going to see it anyway. You're going to see it when the students are doing better, not just in English class, but in other classes, they'll know more. We have to do, I'm not opposed to testing, but I think we should do the absolute minimum that gets the job done. Every moment, every dollar spent on testing is something that might be better done somewhere else. Let's look for indirect measures. Let's look for how many books are taken out of the library, et cetera. For example, one of the great studies on comic books, they took comic books and put them in a junior high school library, graphic novels, the best, Marvel, all this, and they didn't allow them to circulate. They found that they then looked at circulation of what kids were reading, how many books were taken out. Overall library circulation went up like 50% in a couple of months. That is what we call an unobtrusive measure, where the students aren't tested, but we have other ways of finding out. There's a book I highly recommend called Unobtrusive Measures, which tells you how to do this. I mentioned Nushana study a moment ago. She did an unobtrusive measure study I'll tell you about. This is done in a library in the Beverly Hills, Westwood area, where there are many, many families from Iran. She went to the library and took books off the shelf that were supposedly there to help people improve their Farsi, the heritage language in many cases. She found, a handful of books. They were mostly self-help books. She then did what is called a wear and tear study. This is a method invented by our good friend Jeff McQuillan. She looked to see how far people got in the books, when the pages were creased, when there were smudge marks, etc. From this, she concluded the average reader read about 5 pages in each book and then gave it up. This is another way. Look at library circulation. Look at how many books they're reading in general, what they're talking about, whether you see books on their desk, whether they're carrying books, and their performance in other classes. What they talk about, influenced by books. I would do unobtrusive indirect measures. You already have enough formal testing to see if they're doing better in English, which they will be. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raju. Well, we have a request from Mr. Khalid Al-Anbar from Jordan. Could you please ask your question, Mr. Khalid?
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing this this opportunity. So on my own capacity and on behalf of everyone in this virtual room, I'd like to thank you, Professor, for this wonderful lecture and truly insightful opportunity. Also, thanks very much for sharing some of your secrets with us and gossips and complaining as well. Actually, we all know that you are a legend, one in a million. My question directly relates to pleasure reading. You have been emphasizing throughout your lecture, and I see it as being related, and it reminded me of the compelling input principle, the compelling input hypothesis you talked about in 2013. So if I'm right about that, but compelling, you talked about it in the sense that the input is so interesting that you forget that it is in another language. Can you please talk us through how this idea appeared to you in the first place, and to elaborate a little more about how it relates to pleasure reading that you have been emphasizing? Thank you so much.
Well, I was very impressed with the writings of a man named Csikszentmihalyi. Mahali. No, I won't spell it for you. He wrote a book called Flow, F-L-O-W, and we're really talking about flow. When you're in an activity where it's so interesting, your sense of time disappears, your sense of self is diminished, only the activity counts. This is where I first got the idea. They looked at people doing activities that they really, really liked. My favorite study was motorcyclists in downtown Tokyo, okay? It turned out that young men in Tokyo would go hit the streets at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and ride their motorcycles nice and loud down the streets of Tokyo. And why are they doing it? What is going on? Well, the first hypothesis, they're doing it to impress the girls. Well, the girls aren't there at midnight, okay? But some of them said that. But when they asked them about it, wow, it was compelling. When I do this, it's just me and the motorcycle. Nothing else exists. I don't know who I am. There's no feeling of time passing. This is called flow. And that was the source of this idea of compelling input. And I found some case histories. One case I found, a heritage language case. This was the child of one of my former students. We did an article together. Christy Lau, her son, let me get the story right. She and her husband, when they first started working, had really demanding jobs. Christy had a full-time job at the university. Husband was in the computer industry, and they had to occasionally hire a babysitter. Now, the family language was Cantonese. They're from Hong Kong area. The babysitter spoke Mandarin and would turn on the television to Mandarin cartoons. I love cartoons. I think children's cartoons, absolute genius, in my opinion. SpongeBob, fabulous, so clever, so interesting. Anyway, he started to watch the cartoons. Now, Mandarin and Cantonese are not the same language, but there's some vocabulary that helped. There's the pictures and the helpful caretaker who would explain in Cantonese what they were about. He watched the cartoons for a long time. Eventually, when he started school, the father started bringing home movies in Mandarin, not Cantonese. They had friends would come over, speak Mandarin. This child did fine. He acquired the language basically from TV cartoons and occasional movies and got it very, very well because they were so interesting, so comprehensible. We have cases like that where it is quite possible to do it. I like reading, yes, but these other sources of input are sometimes quite valuable as well. The important thing is that the input from the cartoons was totally compelling. He was in a state of flow. Okay, that was my inspiration. That one case history and Chinsak Mahali's book called Flow.
That's great to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid. Let me invite Mr. Josie Joseph from SB College, Changanashiri, for his question.
I think Joseph sir couldn't join probably. Maybe
All
we
right,
would.
yeah.
There are a few people who have raised their hands.
Well, Stephen, I have yet another doubt, by the way, because there are a few people who are experts in English, who are very good in grammar, especially, but they're not able to speak English really well. And there are some people who are not good in grammar, but they can speak really good English. Is that kind of showing us the thing that grammar is not that much necessary, as you were mentioning in the introductory part?
Yes, for sure that grammar is not sufficient. And also, being good in drama is not the same as being able to use it in the real world. Let me tell you about the case of Peter Ustinov, one of the great actors. One of my favorite movies is Top Copy. He's just unbelievably good. He has been in French movies. When he's in a French movie, he sounds French. He acts French. It's very convincing. Native speakers told me that too. He says he can do it in movies, but not in real life. He's not a member, he's not French, he's not a member of that club. There is also an output filter where if you're not a member of the club, you don't get the exact same accent as members of the club. It's a belonging factor. So that could be playing a role. You could do very well in drama, but in real life, it's like not being dressed quite correctly for the group you're in. Okay, if you're a little underdressed, a little overdressed, you feel a little bit funny. So the same thing with accent and fluency, I suspect, is at work here. Good question. Good questions are those that have an answer ready. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Madam Shintu, over to you.
I think there are so many raised hands, but I think the time for questions is over. And we are happy that Professor Krashen could answer so many wonderful questions. And he himself took up picking up the questions from the chat box right in the beginning. And there were a couple of questions in the YouTube live as well. And thank you each and everyone who joined this session. And the feedback link is available. Click them and you would receive the certificates. You can fill the feedback form to receive the certificates. Over to you, Vishnupriya.
My final word, my request.
Yes, sir.
May I make a request?
Definitely, sir.
My request, if you want access to my work, go to my website, SD Krashen, and Twitter. I announced them too, ResearchGate. Read my papers, but don't spend any money on my books. Don't spend any money on my papers. Take advantage of free and let's do it ourselves. Scholars, occasionally at least, put a paper on an open access journal so we can all read it and the field can start growing again.
That's
Thank
one
you.
of the kind and generous thing that Professor Krashen has already done. Yeah, it's really generous.
Generous has nothing to do with it. If we don't do that, we got nothing. We're forced to do this. We have to do it for free. It's the only path, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have, and let me thank Professor Vinod and Dr. Raju Sebastian for joining the discussion. And thank you to all those people who have raised their questions. Over to Vishnupriya. One more point. The recording of the session would be available on the official YouTube channel of Marian College, Kuttikkanam.
Okay, very good. Once
I've
again,
sent it
it's
to you.
nice
I've sent it to you,
to-
Professor Stephen. Yeah.
Thank you. Good to be back. All right. Okay, thank you very much.
Would you mind waiting for a vote of thanks? Short.
I'll wait.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Vishnupriya?
Thank you, Professor Krashen. That was really fun to listen to. I was really new to this topic, but now I'm extremely interested to dig into this topic more. I will be starting and I'll start following you on Twitter from today onwards, right now. And let me invite Aparna S for the vote of thanks.
Good evening to one and all. Best moments never come back. It is the same with our webinar too. But the valuable lessons and insights that we have learned today from this great theoretician would live in our heart forever. It was our pleasure and privilege to have Dr. Stephen Krashen, Professor, University of California, a diligent researcher, well-known political activist, and influential theoretician in the field of second language acquisition. On behalf of Marian College, Kuttikkanam, I take this opportunity to thank our keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Stephen Krashen. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your thoughts on theories on language acquisition and learning. It was great listening to you. We are all inspired by your great words. Thank you. Secondly, I would like to acknowledge our principal, Reverend Dr. Roy Abraham P., and our manager, Reverend Father James Korimala, for their constant support and guidance that keep us going. We are really fortunate to have Dr. Shintu Dennis, Head of Communicative English Department, whose untiring and sincere efforts made this webinar a great success. Thank you, ma'am. A special thanks to Dr. Blesson Sibi, who connected us with Dr. Krashen, without whom this webinar wouldn't have been possible. I must also extend a deep sense of appreciation to Father Sobi Kanalil for his technical support. Finally, from the bottom of my heart, I thank everyone behind the scenes who had contributed to the success of this program and all the participants for your cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. That was a wonderful word of thanks. I'm sure that all of us being attendees in this webinar agree with me that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Well, for me, it was. We are so lucky that even though we are all far away from each other, the technology has helped us to connect with a man of such profound knowledge like yourself, Professor Krashen. Now we'll be ending today's webinar. Dr. Shintu, shall we conclude the session, or is there anything more you would like to add?
That's all. And thank you once again. Thank you, all of you, for joining. And thank you, Vishnupriya, for being a wonderful host.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Stephen Krashen. Yeah.
And thank you, Dr. V.S. Abrams, Dr. Blesson, for making this happen.
I've been following Professor Stephen for over 20 years, and it's, yeah, especially his talks, his thoughts. Yeah, it's really wonderful always to listen to him. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we would love you come back again to Kerala once again.
We'll do that. Lots of new stuff all the time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krashen.
See you.
Okay, we'll do it again. Very good. Thank you. Wonderful hospitality. Good.